On today's episode of the podcast, we have the Hitching Post contributor Caitlin Yarbrough as a guest. Caitlin has a unique story as a conservative. Caitlin was at one point a socialist and a strong supporter of the BLM movement who eventually became disillusioned when some of the rhetoric and behavior from the movement began to justify violence. As always, hosted with me today, we have YCT Vice Chair and Hitching Post editor Clay Gossman, YCT ambassador Colby Reynolds, and myself, Hitching Post editor Paul Dehlinger. All right. Caitlin, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
The fabled Caitlin Yarbrough, former socialist employee. I'm gonna quote this from this, right? Officially retweeted by the YCT State Report and also really famous. But from a radical leftist to a conservative, my questioning of my own ideology began in the summer of 2020, following the George Floyd and BLM riots.
Wait, was that recent?
Yeah, like last summer.
No, I thought you were conservative for like a couple years now.
No, like not even a year.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's a baby. She's
Well, I mean, actually, before I have you ask her about that, can you just kind of walk us through your journey from a very progressive person to a conservative? So you made a pretty radical shift, I would say.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, I think I always kind of grew up as thinking that I should be a Democrat or I should be just on the left in general. I kind of started when I was young. My mom really loved Obama. She took me to his second inauguration.
Wait, so you went to DC for that?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
I was 13. It was actually a cool experience. So yeah, that was kind of my first look at politics. I was 13, so I didn't really have an opinion. I wasn't super educated enough to make my own opinion. So I kind of just went along with what my mom said. My dad was, and still is, pretty hardcore Republican, and he's not the nicest person, so I just associated Republicans with mean, Republican bad. So I always just associated Democrats with being more loving and more, for equality. So that was kind of my view growing up. I just thought I was, supposed to be a Democrat.
It's kind of like what you said in your piece. You say tolerant left.
Oh, yeah.
Quotation marks. You always felt like you needed to be there. I gotta ask, did you ever feel pressured to be like that by some of your peers? Because obviously we have the stigma of the Gen Z, Zoomer, liberal, right? And obviously millennials. So, and that is obviously included within education, right? So, did you ever feel, I guess, sort of an institutional pressure to be more liberal than conservative, or where was your head at?
By institutional, do you mean
Well, within your peers, right, and then maybe within the education system as well.
Oh yeah, and I talked about it in the article that I wrote, but I really even just went into college being a liberal and found a bunch of friends that were also liberal, so it just became this echo chamber where I would only listen to them and what they said, and I never really cared to listen to the other side because I already assumed that they were just racist, homophobic, all this other stuff.
In the echo chamber, were there arguments ever sound, or were they kind of straw man or?
Yeah, it was kind of just conservative bad.
Really? Okay, no strong argument. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. Well, and I feel that is something that we have a problem with too, because that's why I definitely want to get other voices in YCT and stuff, because it can become an echo chamber on the right as well. But going back to your story, so what was the I mean, I know I kind of already said it, but what was what caused you to kind of first? What was the first thing that caused you to look skeptically at the left and maybe kind of turn away from them?
Definitely once all of the peaceful BLM protests, because there were still peaceful ones among all the riots and stuff. I don't think you can necessarily ignore that. But
yeah, Denton had a peaceful one.
Yeah. And even the one that I went to, it was still peaceful. Yeah, they were all peaceful at first, but then once the riots started breaking out, I kind of thought, this isn't okay, this isn't really cool, but I mentioned a lot of this in the article, but if you questioned anything, like, you were branded a racist. Like, you don't care about black people, you don't care that they're dying, like, you just get completely ostracized by, like, the left.
Yeah, and one of the things I've noticed, though, specifically about the BLM organization, they, like, associate a lot of things that really have nothing to do with, like, you know, Black lives. Like, their charter talks about, you know, ending the nuclear family. I mean, because all the people who are in the leadership are effectively Marxists.
Yeah, they're declared Marxists.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's just a cover for Marxism, pretty much.
Exactly. So I mean, you know, they're also apparently, like, their leadership's also very concerned about trans rights, you know, homophobia, which are things that you wouldn't necessarily have anything to do with, like, you know, an unequal amount of black men being shot by the police. It's like, I don't understand what.
Not even that.
Yeah.
I would argue that BLM. One of the things I would give them credit for, amazing marketing, right?
Yeah,
The name Black Lives Matter itself implies that if you are not in favor of BLM, you are not in favor of Black lives. And I have a stat for the all. How much money do you think, in terms of property damage, there was in Minneapolis, St. Paul over the summer?
10 million.
10 million?
Oh, no, it was way more than that. I don't know, probably about. Well, I don't know, because I heard all the riots together was like $5 billion. So for one city, I don't know, like $100 million.
$500 million.
Minneapolis,
And Minneapolis, St. Paul is not it's not a huge city.
Well, I don't think. Yeah,
Is
yeah,
that still-
Lubbock.
Is that still counting the damage of how they defunded the police and everything's going to crap up there right now?
No, it's
Or
probably
is that
talking about just for,
summer?
like, the people rioting.
Right.
Okay, like the police station being
Yeah.
burnt down and
Also,
stuff like that.
38 states had to deploy their National Guards.
Yeah.
over
Well,
there.
and then a lot of ones probably should have that didn't.
Didn't we?
We did.
In Dallas?
Yeah.
Because Dallas was a mess. That man got stoned on the street. That was incredible. Like, incredibly bad. Not incredibly good, but, like, incredibly bad. That was awful to watch.
But I gotta ask
Made
you,
me
Kate,
furious.
Okay.
do you think that there's anything that youth conservatives, right? You've obviously been affiliated with YCT, right? Can be doing, right, to keep marketing themselves to young people, keep challenging academia institutions, right, and sort of winning the battle for hearts and minds, right, of the student body, right? Is there anything you think this conservative student groups can be doing, right, and the conservative movement as a whole, in terms of marketing, that is?
As far as doing more to reach people on the left,
Yes.
I feel like the answer is super obvious. And I think both sides have a problem with this, but just trying to just be respectful and civil whenever you do bring up your views, especially if they differ. Because I know it's funny to, like, own the libs, and, like, all the memes are, like, super funny. But, I think to reach people, you can't just, like, start with the insults and just assume that everyone on the other side of the aisle is bad.
Yeah.
Like, again, that's super obvious, but I think it's a problem on both sides.
Well, we can take a quote out of our future president's Michelle Obama's book. When they go low, we go high, right? Now, look, I don't think some of her people on the left, I don't think some of her leftist allies have necessarily followed that. But is that essentially what you're arguing, right? We stay civil, right? We still keep to our debate roots, right?
Yeah, and especially regards to talking about abortion, rather than just calling liberals baby killers and other types of insults, it would be a lot more effective, especially as they are the party of science, they like to say, then it would be a lot more effective to show them actual stats or scientific evidence and proof that life does begin at conception, and fetuses don't just magically become a person worth saving after the first trimester or whenever they want their arbitrary cutoff.
Yeah, and well, not only that, but also coming at it from a thing of, like, compassion, like trying to consider, the concerns of a mother who's having an unwanted pregnancy. Not to say that we ever concede that it's okay to have an abortion, but also understand, like, yeah, you're not just a bad person for wanting one. You're a person in our society who's kind of taught, like, well, there's all these burdens of having a child, and we understand why that could be hard, but we think a better solution would be, like, still having the child, and the community should, like, help support you. And that's, like, even though I think abortion is wrong, at the same time, there does seem to be a failure of the community to, stand behind, women who have pregnancies. Like, I think Jeremy Bourne made this point on the Daily Wire. It's like, at a church, you may see, like, all these people who are, kind of shame a parent who has, like, a child that, had a teen pregnancy. It's like, well, it very easily could have been your daughter, so I don't know why we're going to, like, ostracize that one family. Like, that is definitely not a Christian perspective to, like, it's like use that as a point to think we're the better Christian family because like none of our kids had unwanted pregnancies. Like, well, I mean, obviously that's not the way to go, but I think our response should be like, well, like, how do we help you have that kid? And I think that's a better way of, on every issue, of getting people from the left over.
I would argue that the two biggest issues that conservatives can win on, if they campaign on in the next decade, are going to be pro-life issues, right? And being sort of anti the BLM culture we saw over the summer where there was like literal outright refusal to call out Chaz Chop, right? To call out the rampant destruction that was going on in American cities, right? And then we get back to pro-life versus pro-choice. I mean, I would argue that's probably one of the biggest winning issues for conservatives, right? Maybe not campaigning on the wholesale abolition of abortion, but being just generally pro-life as a matter of policy. I mean, majority of Americans consider themselves pro-life. Majority of Americans, when presented with the facts of abortion, right, are not in favor of that, just practically. So I would argue that the two biggest losing issues for BLM, or for the Democrats, that is, are BLM and abortion. No, of them, right? I got to ask you as well. Was there any particular moment over the summer, Kate, where you like point to where you like this left is gone?
Yeah, I was going to ask if it was the Dallas riot because that was pretty televised.
I would say it was kind of a mixture of the protests that I went to and as well as the entire riots themselves. Because once those started breaking out, I was literally sitting there and getting on Twitter and being annoying and saying things like, if you're not black, then you don't have a right to tell black people how they should feel in this moment. Well, no, I can have an opinion on it if you are destroying property and harming people, regardless of what I look like. So there were the riots happening in other cities that I saw, and I was trying to justify all this violence, and just in general, at the protest that I went to, like, standing there holding my sign and screaming, like, F the police and all these things that I didn't necessarily believe were true, but because I knew that, like, not all cops were bad, but I was just it was so ingrained into my mind that it was really just ingrained in my mind that this was a good cause, that I was somehow helping black people by just standing here with a sign and justifying all the violence that was breaking out. And I didn't really see how hypocritical it was until I kind of like broke out of the movement and really like took a step back and evaluated it.
I think for me the most outrageous moment was obviously George Floyd was from Houston originally, right?
Yeah.
And I remember I'm from Houston. For those of you who don't know, and I was sitting there watching the local news, right? And they had the coverage of the George Floyd funeral, right? And keep in mind, this was May. This was around May.
First week of June, I think.
It was around that time. Definitely the height of COVID, right? I would argue May, June. That time was when we were definitely still caring about it as a country, right? And I remember this Mayor Turner, the mayor of Houston, Sylvester Turner. He was very pro-mask, very pro stay-at-home orders, right? Very anti-COVID there for a while. Big policy, right? And they had this rally, and I will look up the stat as I'm speaking here, but suffice it to say, there was, I would argue, there was a lot of people in this concentrated area in downtown Houston, right? Just shows a little bit hypocritical, right? The hypocrisy in the left in there, right? Where they're still trying to enforce COVID policy, but they can have massive riots. Well,
when you're fighting for social justice, it's all okay. Like,
Yeah, when you're defeating the evil Nazis, anything's okay.
Yeah, I was gonna just. So what were you gonna say?
I was gonna ask her, like, at your peaceful rally you went to, did you see a lot of hate? Because I'm curious. Because obviously I've never been to one of those, but I'm curious what the other people around there were like.
They were nice among themselves, but definitely not very kind. I guess the things they would chant, and very anti-police and very pretty much anti-Trump, anti-anything that might differ from their view.
Do they even see the police as human? Because I got a buddy who thinks they're robots.
What?
Yeah, he thinks cops are robots. It's ridiculous. He doesn't see that they have families and they're human too. But
did your friend also write the movie RoboCop?
No.
By chance?
I don't know. I feel like that's a little bit of an over exaggeration. Like, I mean, look, I think the whole point is like conservatives don't want to be branded by the Capitol riots. I don't think we can brand all BLM activists as for the riots. Like the quotes like, oh well, it's 91% peaceful. Like, yeah, the problem is there is a substantial amount of BLM protests that turn violent. But just because that's true doesn't mean people who go to peaceful BLM riots deserve to be smeared by the ones that are violent. I mean, you could very well be a very big proponent of or critic of the problem with the police, and at the same time condemn the protests that turn violent.
If you go after the BLM protesters, you gotta go after the organization they're standing with, which is the BLM in general, the declared Marxist organization. Like we said, that's what I think.
Well, I mean, but do you not think somebody who is a member of the organization can be part of a peaceful movement and at the same time condemn the parts of it that become violent?
Yeah, I guess that's possible. It's just, I mean, if it makes sense, I don't understand why you stand with an organization that the administration never really condemned the violence.
Well, I mean, they would give I
only heard of one branch in Tennessee doing it.
They would give very vague responses like, well, we condemn all political violence, instead of addressing the singular problem that was at their time their movement. But I mean, yeah, I've never liked that response when you're dressed somebody asks you specifically something that happens with your movement, your organization. You're like, well, in general, we condemn all political violence. Well, in general, most people do that, but we're asking specifically, will you condemn the violence or the anti-Semitism or the the racism in your own organization? People just kind of extrapolate it to everything. That is a problem.
Speaking of that, you brought up obviously the Capitol Hill riots and all. Do y'all see more? And this is a question for all of y'all. Do y'all see more riots, things like that, destructive riots, coming up in the heightened political climate that we are currently in? Right. Obviously, with on both sides, really. Right. Do y'all see there being more summers like we had with George Floyd, or riots like we saw with January 6th?
I can't rule it out. No. I think it's possible. I mean, obviously, there's going to be another riot, but in terms of multitude of them in a short span of time, it's pretty likely, I'd say.
Okay.
Retweet.
I mean, it's definitely possible. I could definitely see it. It just depends on where, what the temperature is in the future. I mean, does it get worse? Do Democrats start hating Republicans even more than they already do, and do Republicans start hating Democrats more? Do we? And that's one of the things. I think the Republican Party has become very reactionary, so we kind of base everything off of how we feel about Joe Biden or BLM now, instead of holding to an actual set of principles. But we kind of did get sidetracked. I kind of want to go back to Kate's story. So can you kind of tell us what the moment was when you began to shift? I mean, you already said you started feeling uncomfortable when they started, accusing everybody of being a racist who had any kind of critique of the movement. Yeah. But what was your kind of story about becoming conservative? You take your time.
Yeah, it's a good question.
That's why I asked it.
I haven't super thought about that. I don't think I can necessarily put my finger on one moment, like specific, like period or moment in time, but it was definitely just a series of things. So it started with the Black Lives Matter riots and me trying to justify violence that I definitely didn't agree with, but I just didn't want to get called a racist. I didn't want to get ostracized. Like, all my friends were there. That's where I was, like, most comfortable.
Well, and I kind of asked because we all have a different background than you. Like, all of us, and I think I can speak for everybody here, that we all kind of grew up conservative. Colby, is that correct?
Oh, yeah. My family's yeehaw, yeehaw, yeehaw.
Yeah. And Clay, would you say the same for yourself?
Considering that I was door knocking for Republican Congressman John Culberson when I was 15, yes, I was always a conservative.
Yeah, and so I think your story is important, and this is to tie into something else. I think that a lot of Republicans/conservatives are thinking we're just going to rely on the Kates of the world. Like, the left is going to get so crazy, so all the sensible people on the left, the good-hearted people, are just going to, eventually see how crazy the left is, and they'll come to the party. It's like, well, that also kind of requires us to be the sensible party. So I feel like, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, you kind of, got introduced to YCT through Clay, right? Mm-hmm. I could see, and you tell me, if instead of, the first, genuine, nice conservative you met had been, instead of Clay, had been, some, basically reactionary, race realist who's like, well, all those BLM people are just, terrorists, unwilling to even kind of consider, your side of the aisle, thinks everybody on the left is, a monster. Would that have made it a little harder, obviously, for you to come over to our side?
Oh, absolutely. And that, before I met Clay, that's kind of all I knew about conservatives, was that they're not very nice, which obviously isn't the case, but there's bad people on both sides.
Oh, yeah.
But, and kind of going back to what I talked about, how it's important for the right to present their arguments in, a respectful and civil way, because I was already super radicalized. I definitely would have considered myself a leftist for sure. Super radical, very far left. And when conservatives do call everyone on the left terrorists or baby killers or any other insult they can come up with, then that only radicalizes people like me even more. So if you really want to just bring people over to your side or at least help them see your point of view, it is really important to do it the right way.
I've always said that conservatives have marketing issues. We literally campaign on a platform, getting the government less involved in your life and reducing your taxes, and we still get trounced, right? And we're still losing the battle with young professionals, right, millennials, even though we're the party who's campaigning, the movement who's campaigning to give them more money at the end of the day. So I also think conservatives' marketing issue, right?
Well, I want to cut you off right there. When you say we're campaigning to give them more money, no, we're campaigning to take less of their money away. But if you already pay zero income tax, and the Democrats are saying, well, the Republicans want to hoard all that money and use it to control the national debt, and the Democrats want to just give you a $1,400 check. Like my uncle said, it's really hard to run against Santa Claus. Yeah.
I think at this point we're splitting hairs with how.
Well, they're literally two different things.
Both parties are campaigning on platforms of what I would argue a more populist agenda, right? The right will never campaign on an issue of let's cut spending and cut taxes, right? And the left will never be honest with their constituents that we can't just give people money, right? As Annie Lowry made her book known, right? So I would still argue that's giving people money, right, by taxing people, lowering taxes when we have no ability to pay for the spending that we're still paying for. So I think at this point you're splitting hairs.
I don't think it's splitting hairs, but
that doesn't distract from the argument writ large, which is that conservatives' marketing has been very poor in the past few years. I think.
Well, you can just blame it exactly on the conservatives because they lack a platform. We lack a platform in general. The media is the most powerful force in this country, I believe, and like, they are not on our side, as we know.
Well, okay,
like,
but
why the heck would they advertise our stuff?
That's an issue too. I mean, we say the media like it's a monolith. Like, okay, well, like until recently, like the largest single network is Fox News. Which is fairly conservative. So when we say the media, I mean like the media that's not Fox News. And at the same time, even though clearly we have disadvantage when it comes to social media. Like the large tech companies are very anti-conservative. That's true, but I feel like this same idea is going to apply for basically every argument we have or at least I have today. Our response to being unfairly treated is to be ridiculous in some instances. Like, I know a lot of people who's like, well, I don't think Fox News is being, Trumpy enough, so I'm going to listen to ONN, or I'm going to listen to Newsmax, which is basically propaganda pieces. Like, say what you want about CNN, ONN and Newsmax is every bit as, or even, I would say worse with regard to propaganda as CNN is. So I don't understand, like, I think our response is like we would want news networks and social media to be more balanced instead of like, oh, well, we just want our propaganda. That's the problem I hear.
I gotta ask you, Kate, if you had to pick one particular political influence, right? Someone who influenced you the most over this summer, you could say me. No, I'm just playing. But your Ben Shapiro's, your Thomas Sowell's, I know are big, very big influences on you. If you had to pick one person that was initial spark, right, to making you change your opinion, who do you think it was?
Oh, Ben Shapiro, for sure. It's kind of funny because the first time I heard about Ben Shapiro was from a TikTok, actually. So, I know. Someone was kind of like making a parody of him, like talking in his voice or whatever, just like kind of making fun of him. And I'd never heard of him before that moment. So I Googled him. And this was before I had initially really started to think about my own political ideology. So whenever I Googled him, I looked at all the stuff he believed, and I was like, oh my gosh, this guy is horrible. He's just so mean, and I didn't like him at first, but once I kind of started shifting, I looked into him again, and I was like, oh, he makes a lot of sense. It's very facts and logic, as we all know. So.
Well, I guess it was really weird, like, hearing about a Jewish Nazi. It just probably didn't make a lot of sense. All right,
yeah.
I want to bring Colby in as well, though. I don't know if you listened to the first episode. We all kind of represent different, parts of the conservative movement. I'm the more traditional conservative. Clay kind of represents the more libertarian. Colby's the more populist. At different points, the left has, hated, one specific part of the conservative movement at some points. Like, I know this will kind of age me, but I do definitely remember the 2004 to 2008, the people the left hated were the neocons. But, and then I think during the Tea Party phase, the people the left hated were the libertarians. So, I feel like the people the left hate is, people who more align with Colby, the populists. So, what would you have to say to that? Do you agree that's, the populists they hate the most, or is it still, the millionaires who, the left's raining against?
Can I say I don't know?
Yeah, that's
okay.
fine. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
if
I don't know.
You know, well, so when you were on the left, who were kind of you targeting your hate at? I know it was broadly at, the other side, but
yeah.
Did you have a certain, group of, conservatives that you thought were really obstructing, justice or something?
That's a fantastic question, Paul.
Yeah, well, I'm full of them. Okay. So where would you say you lean now? Because I noticed, for people who come from the left, there's two sides. There's some who come full bore, they're MAG all the way. I used to be part of the left, and they're all crazy. So like the Dave Rubins of the world. And then there's some people who hold on to a lot of their progressive leanings, but they just kind of acknowledge the left has some problems. So where would you say you line up on that spectrum?
I know, at least within YCT, it's not super popular. I would say, I talked to Clay about this the other day. The word conservarian, kind of.
Conservatarian.
Yeah. So I honestly would still consider myself pretty socially liberal on a lot of things. But definitely, I lean a lot more right, for sure, still. Mm-hmm. I know it's not
No, that's fine.
I know libertarians aren't the most popular people. Especially within YCT.
No, you say that. I feel like it was way too libertarian, like, when I first got here. Well, and, we said Clay is our, person representing the libertarian faction. But, Colby, I mean, where do you align on, like, how do you feel about libertarianism in general?
When it comes to laws, I see that they should be there if the action they're, I guess, regarding to will either harm somebody or harm other people in most instances. I'm very critical on, like, drug laws. Not critical, but heavy. I encourage them, I guess, if that makes sense.
Oh, so you support, like, having strict drug laws?
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
okay.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, that's the opposite of what I was thinking, because I did kind of... because a lot of populists are, quasi-libertarian, or at least libertarian on some issues, and my thing has always been, like, I know I'm the guy who, quote-unquote, like, hates libertarianism, but, I have a lot of libertarian leanings, as strange as that might sound to people, but I've always said, like, the Libertarian Party can't be taken seriously as long as they boo people who say it should be illegal to sell heroin to 8-year-olds. I mean, yeah, that's just not a winning issue. Yeah. But, like, I think for a lot of things, libertarians have strong points. They're, like...
The individual freedom, definitely. I'm way for that.
And Dave Smith made this point, who's, I think, is basically a crazy libertarian, but he said, like, how come, like, the Libertarian Party got a quarter of the votes they got in 2016 when, there was so much government overreach, when government was doing so many things that infringed on freedom as far as, and I'm not as mass skeptical as some people in YCT, but yeah, there's a legitimate question, like, can the government force you to wear a mask in public all the time? Like, is it, justifiable for them to close down all these businesses? Like, I think there's a lot of points, like, libertarians could have shined here, but instead they were, they were too busy having petty arguments, and specifically this candidate that we had, Jo Jorgensen, I think she tried to co-opt a lot of people on the left by, like, being very pro-BLM. I was like, look, like, and I guess you could answer this for me, like, do you think at any time, no matter how pro-BLM a libertarian was, would you ever thought, like, yeah, I'm going to go from being a leftist to be libertarian, like I'm going to be like, oh yeah, we need to reduce, like, federal spending, because I feel like a lot of things get tied together. Like, if you're BLM, you're for, like, higher taxes on the rich and spending more money. Like, would you say that's accurate?
Pretty much, yeah. The whole, like, eat the rich.
Yeah.
Like, former Bernie bro. For sure. Yeah, I was definitely, the rich billionaires shouldn't exist. All of that.
But millionaires are good now, right?
Yeah, it shifted whenever Bernie became a millionaire.
Yeah. So,
well, and you'll notice that wasn't funny. His quote used to be like millionaires and the billionaires, and now it's just the billionaires.
Yeah. The 1%.
That 1%.
Well, he had plenty of time to think that over in his 3 houses,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and he's been in government for, like, 40 years now? He was...
Yeah, I think around as long as Joe Biden.
And, he's also looked the same.
Well,
yeah, he's looked the same.
I don't know about as long as Joe Biden. Joe Biden was literally in the Senate before he was legally allowed to be in the Senate. He got elected when he was 29.
How did he get elected?
You can be elected before, but they couldn't swear him in until after his birthday.
Oh, okay.
Which was kind of hilarious. Okay, so back to my original question, though. So, you said you kind of feel that you're a conservatarian now? Like, okay, so it's like you're basically the joke that so I guess this applies to so few people, I think, on the right, but you're kind of fiscally conservative but socially a liberal.
Yeah, I kind of explain it like conservative but low-key libertarian.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a lot of social issues like gay marriage, I think that should just stay legal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the government should have the power to tell 2 people that they can't get married.
Mm-hmm.
I do think drugs should be legalized.
All drugs, like even like cocaine,
heroin to 8-year-olds.
Not to 8-year-olds.
I don't think she's saying that. But... no, I don't want to strawman you there. So like I would say like what hard drugs should be legalized. Like I think all of us here kind of would think maybe marijuana. Like some of the stories you hear like 80 years in jail for a pound of marijuana. Like okay, maybe that's a little ridiculous. But yeah, like cocaine, that's a pretty hard drug.
I have always kind of I have the view that I think people should do whatever they want as long as they're not harming other people.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point of view. Do you think that the left nowadays is going against these individual freedoms. I mean, obviously not the cocaine on the coffee table per se, but increasingly, right, you see them, maybe pro-gun, right? They're not as they're in favor of limiting your rights there. Do you think that the left nowadays is more of a censorship and more of a anti-rights party?
Yeah, for sure. Especially, you talked about censorship. Whenever it came to the whole, kicking Trump off Twitter and, that kind of stuff, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I definitely think the left is definitely in favor of censoring things they don't like and just wanting to abolish anything they don't like. It's been really popular to just deplatform conservatives, essentially.
Yeah. And now we have the come and take it Dr. Seuss shirts that are all over, right?
Yeah.
Well, and then a lot of it, the censoring isn't even from, government power. It's just, the social ramifications for it. So people will self-censor. Because I think a lot of people forget the Dr. Seuss thing came from the actual trust, just choosing to, not really, or keep those books out of circulation because out of fear that they would get basically canceled because, because of some of Dr. Seuss's old books. So, we'll just preemptively take these out of circulation to appease the left, which is, I think, we would all agree, a problem. But, to some point, I think we should also, this is back to winning people over the left, we can't just reactionally be like, well, the left wants to do this, so we're just against it. We need to meet them halfway and not even, necessarily agree with them, but see where they're coming from instead of oh, they're just, fascists who want to, control everybody. Well, maybe some people in the Democratic Party basically are, but I like to think, most people on the left are genuinely good people who, care about police brutality, care about, quote-unquote, income inequality. Now, I think some of their solutions are really bad, but yeah, I think you were probably just as good of a person, back then as you are now, so I don't want to say, everybody on the left's a bad person.
Oh, yeah.
So what would you've kind of already talked, be, logical, be civil, but what issues do you think we could, kind of find common ground with people on the left, or your average person on the left?
That's a hard question.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a hard question. Common ground among people on the left?
Or at least, something to start with. Where is a good place to start? So, I have noticed there's been the strange times where, the populist left and the populist right kind of agree on. It's when they're criticizing big tech. There's a lot of people on the left because, some people who've been censored that are not of the right have been, either the Bernie bros or the very, anti-war Democrats who are, saying, well, why are we, criticizing Russia this much, blah, 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 this, and then, Twitter would be whoa, it sounds like Russian propaganda, better cancel that, and, to that point, I think they're probably wrong, because I don't like people being soft on Russia, but at the same time, those are the people who are of the left that would get canceled. It wasn't establishment Democrats. Okay, well, let's see, so, I guess, Kate, what I want to ask you is, where do you see the conservative movement going in the future? Now that you're, one of us.
Part of the crew, part of the ship. Part of the crew, part of the ship.
What do you mean, where do I see it going?
Where do you see, do you see us becoming, a little more moderate? Do you see us, becoming more reactionary, which is one of my concerns? Do we kind of splinter off? Is it going to be just a big tent party, and you have your social conservatives, your social liberals, fiscally conservatives like you, your radical libertarians, your populists, your neocons? Is that what you see, or do you see us becoming more unified? Because, that's what we've kind of relied on unifying us, is just being well, we don't have to, agree on anything, we just know we're against the left. And, that's what the Democrats did, and it worked for them, so maybe that's what we think, well, we'll just be anti-Joe Biden. The problem is, Joe Biden, is, bad as I think his presidency is turning out, he's hard to become a central figure of hate, because he's just well, he's all over the place. He's, he's not all there. He's, he's not a strong figure in the sense that he's routinely, condemning the right. He's just kind of doing things and then hey man, why are you criticizing me? You're just one of those radical people, and then he'll, go to sleep or something. Unlike Trump, who was making bombastic things, always, criticizing the left. So it was very easy for the left to rally around him because he's a quote unquote fascist. Or maybe I'll add a question.
Yeah.
Where do you hope the conservative movement goes, or not only the Republican Party goes in the future? Would you like us to become a more progressive party in that sense? Do you? I mean, because I think a lot of us would think that path is doomed to oblivion. So, like, if you were in charge of the Republican Party, what would your platform be?
Oh my god.
We're giving you a lot of power here.
I know.
Magic wand. There we go.
And I'll open this question up to everybody. Colby, where would you like the party to go? Listening to Kate, listening to how there's an opening for us to get more people on the left, what do you think the correct path would be?
The problem I see is that politics has been so polarized that it's going to be pretty hard to get anybody from the other side unless this other side screws up pretty bad, I guess. But for, like, issues, I would say, like, the party should platform for.
Yeah,
okay. Teachers armed in schools to help defend them, if that makes sense. I know there's a huge negative connotation to that for some reason. I'm my view on the Second Amendment in terms of private ownership is in line with the MAD strategy from the Cold War, mutually assured destruction, that if both parties are armed, then it's going to be a lot harder for either of them to mess with each other, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the idea of MAD was that not only that they're armed, that
they kill each other.
It would end in total annihilation. Yeah. But we can't really do that with, like, I mean, I don't know, applying the idea of MAD to, like, because that's what you're addressing, school shootings, right?
School shootings and shootings in general.
I mean, that seems kind of like an overreaction.
Well, I can't find of another thing to, like, I guess.
So, but I mean, that's a pretty niche issue, don't you think? Like, it's like people on the right have, like, endorsed that. I don't really know how I'd come down on it. I mean, should teachers have the option? Yeah, I would agree with that. But as far as, like, I mean, like, out of, like, the amount of people who'd actually, like, vote on that one issue.
Yeah.
I mean,
I was thinking that one.
I mean, like, like...
I couldn't think of another one.
Well, what about, like, text censorship? I know that's, like, a hot-button issue for...
Oh, yeah, no. Text should be, I think it's, as Ben Shapiro argues, a public forum. Should be classified as a public forum, since they heavily resemble the ones back in the day, like the town square, corkboard things, which means that they can't choose to censor things. I'm very pro that. I think the party should be, I guess, very free speech, have a huge emphasis on that in the future. I mean, we already do, but even more so, I'd say. Second Amendment, like I said, I think we should emphasize how great the economy was under Trump's presidency and come up with a plan of how to recreate that again and sell it to people, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But, like, I'm not for the huge spending, like I said. Or I never said that, like Clay said, excuse me. I think it's very possible for us to cut taxes and cut spending. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. Trump cut so many of these extra administrative programs, and I guess
but I mean, he didn't really cut spending by any
he didn't. But
considerable metric. Well, I mean, and I feel like we're going off on a tangent. That's kind of my fault. But yeah, I mean, like the hard thing with cutting spending is like, I mean, you could, cut around the edges, but like the big programs are, the social programs, which I know, most
Medicare.
Republicans and all Democrats don't want to cut. But like, yeah, going off those issues, like Kate, any of those do you kind of agree with? Like, I feel like the censorship one is something that for a lot of people is something to get on board, kind of pushing against the censorship brought down upon us by the big tech companies.
As far as issues go, I would definitely agree with Colby. As far as free speech goes, I mean, like you said, we already do push for that a lot, but I think still Ben Shapiro always says to continue being in the culture, to really fight against it. It's a horrible paraphrase, but just pushing back against the cultural narrative that conservatives are just bad and have bad ideas, and that they can't be pushed.
Well, I mean, do you think the government should mandate that the tech companies be more open in the fact that, like, they can't censor people for stuff that's not illegal? I mean, I think we would all agree, like, if you're saying, like, hey, you know what, we should all, like, get a mob and murder this person. Like, okay, yeah, those people need to be banned. But if it's just saying an unpopular opinion, like, yeah, banning seems kind of kind of wrong. It seems kind of a restriction of free speech.
Oh yeah, and I think the whole banning hate speech thing is also a little bit ridiculous.
Because it's so subjective.
Oh, yeah.
Is the thing.
Yeah.
One, like, what's hate speech, today, or, not hate speech now may be considered hate speech, and, what the left labels hate speech is, like, so vague. It's like, oh, anything that's a fact that we find offensive, that's hate speech. It's like, well, I mean, but it's reality. I mean, and, one thing I want to ask, coming from a progressive side, like, I feel like one of the biggest issues for social conservatives is, like, the transgender issue. So how have you felt about that? I mean, it's a very vague, topic, but it's like, as far as, like, transgender athletes competing against women in sports, like, the mandated, like, pronouns, like, some people are required to use. I mean, does that go a little even too far for you, as progressive as you are, or do you kind of think we should be more open to considering that?
I think this can go without saying that obviously everyone deserves respect as people, just in general. But as far if you were going to talk about science and reality, honestly, I think men are men and women are women. It's not that I think trans people don't exist necessarily. But scientifically, I mean, sex and gender are not separate. You can't just change your gender just because you feel like it.
But Bill Nye told me that was possible.
Well, and that's a good point. Like, I definitely agree that sometimes we get too much into, we're just going to make fun of it because it's ridiculous. But, I mean, we should, if we want to argue, things from biblical perspective, we need to come at this from a point of compassion. Like, these people, I don't think they're faking it so they can win, a competition. I think, with regard to the athletes, but I think these people genuinely feel like they're, trapped in the wrong body, and, we should be very compassionate about that. I don't think compassion should lead us to let's endorse that idea, because for no other thing would you endorse it. If somebody was 75 pounds and they thought they were fat, we wouldn't be like, yeah, you probably are. You should probably lose some more weight. We'd be like, no, you should eat or you will die.
Yeah.
But, we don't need to make fun of them. We shouldn't call them trannies. We should, try to, see, how they feel and, get them help so they can kind of come to terms with reality and, feel comfortable with being, a man or a woman. I kind of want to end this with Clay. How do you feel about these issues? Where do you think we're going to go in the future, and what do you think we can win on?
Well, I think we are heading towards the direction of populism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is for deeper rooted issues, right? I think that, or deeper rooted meaning. That's because with the modern culture of social media, right, we're getting more reactionary, right, more short term based, right, with how we view the body politic as a whole, right? So it's now all about getting out and mobilizing your base on social media, right, and being more reactionary. So as far as where we are heading, it's sort of this right-leaning populist sense, right? I could definitely see us becoming more, as weird as it sounds, going back to the Tea Party fiscal conservatism, only as a silhouette, right? During the Biden administration, because we'll campaign on that because it's a Democrat in office, right? Or as far as where I'd want us to go, I think I would want us to. I'm almost becoming a single issue voter on fiscal monetary policy. Almost, I say that. I did vote for Jo Jorgensen after all on the sole issue that I thought she was the most fiscally conservative, right?
Audit the Fed, man.
No. But I would like us to do that, and I think in the era of post-Trump, what will happen is we'll go back to sort of moderating ourselves on viewpoints, right? Keeping strong on social issues, but going back to sort of a moderate, almost a compassionate conservative viewpoint, right? Where we're marketing ourselves in the suburbs as the party, the movement for the people, right, and for the suburban voter, right? But yeah, I think that's my general summation of where we're heading and where I'd like us to head. Paul.
Interesting. I would definitely like that as well. If I'm being totally honest with myself, I think telling people we're going to spend more money or be fiscally conservative is a losing issue. Like I said in the last podcast, I think we'll become more fiscally conservative when we're basically forced to. when we kind of can't even pay attention to our own voters, and we're like, look, we just have to spend less money, or our bonds will be worth nothing. But I think that's a good closing part. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to thank everybody for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please follow us and rate us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or subscribe to us on YouTube. Please share this with your friends and family. And this has been From the Brink.